Okay, I want to look at one of the most well-known street artists, Shepard Fairey. And if you don't know the name Shepard Fairey, then you're probably familiar with his clothing line, which is Obey. And so Shepard Fairey is from Rhode Island. He attended art school. Now, his background, he's a skateboarder, he's into punk rock, and that sort of inspired a lot of his art that he does today and how to get him into street art. He wasn't necessarily inspired by graffiti, although, he works in the streets with graffiti writers. So his idea was started off with stickers and the idea about how stickers can promote messages. So the principle that he really focuses on is the idea of repetition and how stickers are really good for him to, as a medium, to demonstrate the principle of repetition because stickers are really easy to put up, but they're really hard to take off. And then I don't know if it's from when we were a kid, we get stickers on our work when we were kids, on a test or something, we collect stickers, but people can't sort of resist their urge to stick them on everything. They have stickers on their cars, on their skateboards, on their guitars, on laptops. So for him, because he came from the skateboarding sort of punk rock sort of background, stickers sort of were his badge of culture, as he calls it. So it sort of talks about who he is, right? And the bands that he listens to and messages he believes. So for him, creating the stickers was a way to express himself and communicate his ideas. So he would, we'll talk a bit more about the basis of stickers at another unit. So I'm going to skip over some of this stuff and talk more about his particular stuff. But he started off by creating his Andre the Giant Obey stickers, and he put them up everywhere he could on his own. And he originally hand printed them himself, and he cut them himself. And what he started to do is gave them up to some of his friends, and his friends would also start to put them up. So the idea that's similar very much to graffiti is the idea of quantity, right? Sending them out. The more that you see it, the more repetition, the more meaning that it gives to the sticker, right? That's how you get famous. That's how you make an image. It's very popular. And that's very similar with, advertising, right? So he then started to put classified ads in different magazines where people could send in self-addressed stamped envelopes, and he would send them out stickers for free, and then those people would put them up, and that's sort of amplified now with the whole sort of sticker genre is that, you send them out, people put them up all over the world for you. And then on top of that, with social media, you take pictures of them, then you post them on Instagram. And it's a way to sort of, you don't necessarily have to travel to all these places, but you're sending your own message out. So Shepard Fairey did something really interesting. And on his website, which is obeygiant.com, he actually lets you download the stencils and download different images, so you could actually print his stickers out yourself and then put them up and actually create the stencils yourselves and put them up for him. So the idea of him not necessarily he created the idea that's getting spread out. He didn't necessarily, he wants you to reproduce these things. So anyway, so we'll talk more about sort of stickers later, but let's talk more about his idea. So again, Obey, we've talked about this before, how his whole idea started when he was in an art school and actually started off as a joke. And he took a poorly reproduced image of Andre the Giant as an advertisement in his newspaper. And again, Andre the Giant was a wrestler back in the 80s. He was in a bunch of films. And he took that stern image and that poor quality of reproduction and he simplified it to something that would be easily reproducible. So he was a silkscreen artist, which is very similar to stencil. So very basic colors, very solid images, black and white, simple color, very stern face, and he put the word obey underneath it. So when he put them out, it was anonymous, so nobody knew that it was him doing it. Nobody knew the meaning, right? And the more that he put it up, the more sort of he got to think about his idea and give it sort of more meaning. So it kind of was inspired by George Orwell's 1984 book, the concept of, Big Brother. The idea of obey is sarcastic. It's reverse psychology. It's telling you to obey, but really it's asking you not to obey. It's not just to so much revolt, but to more to question things, right? What are the consequences of a dictatorship, and what happens when you give up your obedience? His ideas are concepts of abuse of authority and racism and the First Amendment rights. And his whole concept is people are just sort of sleepwalking throughout life, and obey is his way of splashing cold water on people's faces, right? So that's what he's sort of saying. He's not telling you to obey. He's telling you to sort of question authority. So the idea of illegally placing up stuff in the street itself is a political act. So the purpose of it really is to, when people are confronted with these images that look very similar to posters that would be advertisements or billboards that are advertisements, he wants people to start questioning about all of the images that they confront, right? What are all these different images telling me? What are the advertisements that are telling me from corporations? What are they really saying? So he's hoping to start that sort of dialogue. And so there are influences from graffiti, but he doesn't claim to actually have direct influences. Being in Rhode Island, there wasn't a lot of graffiti at the time. So this sort of, happens at the same time as graffiti. But so again, the idea, like, for example, like cornbread, his idea of repetition, writing cornbread all over the place, gave him that degree of fame. And using, subway trains, the idea that just galleries in motion, these things can give fame and inspire careers and launching more sort of writers. And Shepard Fairey is very much working that way as well, launching other street artists. The idea that graffiti is a lifestyle and a mindset and a culture. So is street art. But the idea is that the graffiti is an act of defiance, right? So is street art, and the spot where the graffiti goes is the art form itself, which is very much street art. And that's the difference, having art on the street as opposed to art in galleries. So what's similar between graffiti and Shepard Fairey's work is that, remarking his territory. So each time they put the sticker up, if it's ever damaged or covered up, he goes back up and he puts it up again. They're both about rebelling and inspiring other sort of ideas and writers. So they coexist. They don't necessarily work together. But for Shepard Fairey, creating something is not enough. So his idea is beating into people's heads over and over again. And that's the addiction for him, like the idea, like just pumping out the ideas, which again is very similar to graffiti, just, putting your name up over and over again. Now, so let's talk about some of the influences of Shepard Fairey, and one of them is Barbara Kruger, and love this artist. We're going to look more in depth with next lesson, but she is sort of a generation ahead of Shepard Fairey, and she does these works. I shop, therefore I am. She takes ideas from mass media, and she takes the images from mass media and then juxtaposes these, the font text over top of it that sort of changes the meaning of it. But what Shepard Fairey is influenced by is the type of font that she uses, and that bold sort of red against white font, the colors of black and white and red. Now, what you notice, and we'll talk more about this in the next lesson, is Supreme is actually influenced as well by Barbara Kruger with that, white font on a red background. So he's also influenced by Andy Warhol, who is a generation before Barbara Kruger, and he's a pop artist, and he started taking images from popular culture and turning them into fine art. So he's making a mockery of the fine art world, right? He's taking household items and turning them into fine art. So this is one of Andy Warhol's most famous ones are the Campbell soup cans, and Shepard Fairey takes that Campbell soup can and he changes it and adds the a bay to it. The idea of that mass production and the printing technique of silkscreen is something that Andy Warhol did and something that Shepard Fairey uses as well. Andy Warhol comes from an advertisement background. Shepard Fairey is taking all the things that Andy Warhol did for advertisement and using all the things that advertisers do to sort of promote their product, but his product is the idea of obey and questioning authority. So Shepard Fairey, one of his most famous works, is something that he was commissioned by President Obama to make these posters and helping him get elected. And so taking images from the mass media, so taking a photo of President Obama from the internet and changing it and creating a poster and then putting a word in there to give it a different meaning. Andy Warhol did the same thing. He did a series of icons, and one of the most famous ones was Marilyn Monroe, where he took an image. He did it because there wasn't internet, but from a newspaper, a poorly reproduced one, and then changed it into silkscreen, which is like a stencil, and then changed all the colors and mass produced it that way, and talked about sort of the icons that we have in their popular culture at the time. So did they take the original photographs? No. And that's sort of Andy Warhol, and sort of allowed you to take things from everyday culture and change them slightly so they become their own as an artist. And so the idea of appropriation sort of gives you artistic license and ability to do that. However, there are copyright laws, and sometimes you can get away with that appropriation, and sometimes you can't. And in this case with Obama, the original photographer actually sued Shepard Fairey and for copyright infringement, and she actually won the case. There's numerous cases, though, involving even Andy Warhol, who was sued over copyright infringement, and they lost the case. So it's hard to say what violates, what counts as copyright infringement and what's appropriation. Now, another really interesting influence of Shepard Fairey was this film that was made in the 1980s called They Live, and it was made by John Carpenter. And really interesting film, and I recommend that you watch it. The main character, again, happened to be another wrestler. I don't know what it was with in the 1980s with all of these wrestlers becoming actors in movies, but really, back in the day, wrestling was really popular, and it was very much an acting job. So Rowdy Roddy Piper was the main character, and he's a construction worker. And he finds a pair of sunglasses, and he puts them on, and they turn everything into black and white. And so as he so everything turns into black and white. And as he puts them on, he looks into the world, and where everything sort of changes. Where all the advertisements and stuff are, they say slogans such as obey, consume, reproduce, right? So it sort of reveals, it's like revealing the true nature of what's happening in the world. And also when he puts them on, not only is everything changing in terms of the magazines and the billboards and everything, but people in authority or rich people actually look as zombies, and sort of making a critique then about who has power and control and consumerism. So anyway, it's a really interesting film. So that's just a little clip there to sort of show you, to demonstrate the idea of it. So So these are some of the pictures of some of the zombies and what they look like. These are the authoritarian figures. So it's a really neat film, and I'll leave the link there for you. So that's one of Shepard Fairey's other influences, especially where he got the idea of obey. So all of that kind of came together for his whole obey sort of campaign and slogan. And he actually does his own artwork and sort of takes the idea of those zombies and obey in the background, and has his card, his Andre the Giant sort of card there. So something else that was in the film is that the money that people had in John Carpenter's film actually changed to "This is your God," right? Again, talking about consumerism. And Shepard Fairey did a whole series of money images that actually said "This is your God" and has his Obey logo and everything on it. So again, really taking some of the ideas that are in there and then pushing them and playing with them and sort of bringing them to light in his street art. Now, another one of Shepard Fairey's influences is a book called The Medium is the Message, and it's a book by Marshall McLuhan. And this was written a while ago, but it's an attempt to understand how the environment impacts us. And the idea is that people become numb to their environment and they need certain experiences that snap themselves out of the trance. And Marshall McLuhan has actually updated his book several times. And actually, when he wrote the book, it was ahead of his time, because it was sort of the idea when TV was sort of feeding ideas into human beings. And but of course now with the internet and social media, it's become way more relevant. And Shepard Fairey uses the concept of something called phenomenology. And phenomenology is the idea of repeating an image gives it meaning. The repetition of an image gives it meaning. So he uses that, his Obey slogan and stickers and posters, to reawaken a sense of wonders of one's own environment. Now, what's really important is the idea of how the spot becomes the art form. So the idea is you can't separate street art from the place that actually puts it up there. Putting it up in the street is what becomes the message for people, and the placement on the street is actually the art form itself. So Shepard Fairey, the reason why he likes street art so much, he likes to promote the idea that one person can make a change. And the idea about street art, as opposed to putting art in a gallery, is that with street art there's no censorship, right? You're doing it without permission, right? So there's no committee deciding what goes up like it is in an art gallery. Nobody's judging it, saying what is art and what's not art, what's allowed to go up. So the streets themselves are the medium. Streets are the materials that you're creating it with. It gives you total freedom of expression using the street as a medium. And the message by using street art as a medium, influenced by Marshall McLuhan's book, is that you're being defiant and you're not willing to bow to the system. So whatever you're saying is not bowing to the system. It's your total freedom of expression. And because of this, everyday people can have a voice, as opposed to just the corporations putting up their billboards, having their own voice, controlling what the messages are in the general public. Not just having, the art galleries aren't deciding what people get to see, what's counted as art in their community, what goes into a textbook, are the experts deciding what's being taught in schools, and so on and so on. So, and just his sticker campaign, the way that he started out, it was very inexpensive, and it's something that he could do. So his point is that everybody can make a change, and street art gives you that ability to sort of to have that voice in the general public and do it inexpensively. So, he's progressed now to big, large murals, and because he's got sort of a reputation now, he's allowed to say more, and he's supported a lot. So for him, art is activism, it's propaganda. So he actually goes back and he uses pictures of historical propaganda. He looks at pictures of Black Power. He does parodies of authority, and he tweaks popular culture and icons and to sort of educate people. And so very similar to Barbara Kruger, where he's changing sort of the context and the text of what it's saying to give it a new meaning. So, things like taking, juxtaposing one image against the other and changing, putting a slogan in there makes you sort of talk about different issues. For this one, these sunsets are to die for, to talk about sort of environmental issues, right? Taking images from, politics and juxtaposing, a bomb instead of a baby over top of George Bush, talking about sort of images, taking powerful propaganda images from, past governments throughout the world and putting flowers at the end of it. Gives it sort of a different meaning. So one of the main concepts for inherent in street art and for Shepard Fairey is about public space and the idea of reclaiming public space. So according to Fairey, public space is the only option for free speech and expression. So his opinion is that the taxpayer pays for this public space, and because he's a taxpayer, he's part owner of this public space, and they should be able to use this public space for his images. And why can't he? Corporations can use it for theirs. We don't have a choice when we go out. I'm thinking going downtown Toronto and seeing all the advertisements, all the billboards everywhere, on the sides of the buses, on the sides of the bus shelters. I mean, every space is usable and for sale for corporations, right? But we own that public space as taxpayers. So shouldn't we have a say into sort of what sort of things go up in that public space? So he feels that public property is fair game. To him, street art equals free speech, right? So that's his idea of playing with, street arts play with billboards. So, and very much in him, he's got to deal with art and the idea of capitalism, because some people believe that he has been a sellout because he makes money from his art now. So how do you balance that idea of having street art and free speech, but also, being able to make a living as a street artist and still be able to have your own freedom of speech, but not be controlled by, corporations and capitalism, right? So how does this affect his freedom of speech? And he calls this idea, this supply and demand economics of a capitalist society. So the idea is it's a Robin Hood idea. So corporations purchase his art, and he gets commissioned to do stuff, and he takes that money that he makes, and that funds his own sort of propaganda art. So it gives him the freedom, being able to make the money from the big corporations, gives him the freedom to be able to do his art, and put it up in the streets. And that way, nothing is dictated by fine art market forces. So what's, popular in sort of in fine art culture, he gets to sort of, instead of follow that, he gets to drive that. So running his own business basically gives him the freedom to produce his own, he calls it propaganda work, and travel to cities to put it up, right? It lets him have his own shows. He controls the shows. He decides. He's not applying to galleries saying, please take my stuff and show it. He gets to have complete control on how it's exhibited, where it's exhibited, etc., right? So he does a lot of really neat stuff. So we know that he does his stickers, but he also does street art posters. He does t-shirts. He's very relevant. He's just made his own series of masks, right? His images are easily reproducible because he's using sort of this advertisement sort of way of doing his images. And because of those techniques, and because that powerful message and logo, it's easy for him to reproduce them. And he has a whole clothing line. And what's the sort of benefit about, having t-shirts and a clothing line is that he's sending out his message more, right? They're walking billboards when we buy these t-shirts, promoting that message as well, right? So it's the same idea of him distributing his stickers to other people to put them up. People can buy his t-shirts and wear them, and again, redistribute his message, right? Another really neat thing that he did about the whole concept of sending that message to the mass and how to get that message out to everybody so people can redistribute his messages. He did something really cool when he did this whole series called We the People for Donald Trump's inauguration. And the rule was for the inauguration is that there was a limit on the size of signs that you're allowed to bring to the inauguration. So he did something quite smart, and he took ads out, I think it was in the Washington Post, and he did full page ads of these 3 separate images saying We the People. And so to distribute the images, the advertisements then were in the newspaper. On the day of the inauguration, people could actually take those full page advertisements and use them as posters to send out a message for Trump's inauguration. We even have a piece in Toronto that Shepard Fairey did, and this was part of a mural tour that went through out the world. There were 7 different cities that he did. The last stop was in Toronto in 2014, and this was commissioned, and it's just outside a graffiti alley. And it's a piece, again, about obey and never trust your own eyes and believe what you're told. But, of course, he's telling you not to really do that. He's still working. And, of course, whenever there's, something going on in the world, he comments through his art. So he did recently he did a piece. It was a tribute to the healthcare workers. This piece is called Angel of Hope and Strength. And it's a tribute to the frontline healthcare workers dealing with COVID-19. And he's selling his work to fundraise for various organizations. Now, he is very much an activist, and I imagine with all the things going on in the world right now with George Floyd, I imagine there are going to be some pieces coming out very soon about what's going on. And because one of the issues that he has addressed a lot in his work is the issues of racism. And although this is a piece that he completed earlier, there's a whole variety of pieces that he's done. He's actually reposted this on his website to address the riots and the protests that are happening right now in the U.S. in response to the murder of George Floyd. And I imagine there'll be something else coming out very soon. So that is in a nutshell of Shepard Fairey. And again, he does a lot of videos, and he likes to talk a lot about his artwork. So Obey Giant is the name of his website. And if you want to read anything about him, have a look there and see some of his stuff and what he's currently doing. And if you want to really get into his stuff, there's tons of YouTube videos that he's done. Okay, so let's look at Barbara Kruger's work next.